Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 8 of Educational Assessment with Professor DeNobile. I'm your host, Professor DeNobile, and this episode is Understanding and Selecting Assessment Methods. I would like to start this episode by letting you know that this is for 3.1 and that modules 3.1 and 3.2 have to be completed this week in order to make sure that we're on target with our timeline. But think of it this way. You do the next two modules together, and then you can relax for spring break. However, I would also suggest this. I like knowing when my spring breaks are or when any of my breaks are because it allows me to know when I have a little bit more flexibility. As I'm recording this, I'm on midwinter break and I'm trying to catch up and get ahead. More get ahead in a lot of my work. I caught up with the work that I had to do for you guys. So I caught up with that, but now I'm trying to get ahead with some of my work, such as recording a lot of the lectures for Module 3. And by the time this is posted and you watch this, I hope to have all of Module 3 up and running so that if you do want to go ahead during spring break, you can. With that said, this particular episode is going to be pretty short. We're only covering two things: making educational assessment decisions and methods of assessment to consider. So this flowchart's like half of this entire presentation. So here we go. Making educational assessment decisions. We always start with knowing who our students are and understanding what their needs are in relationship to the standards. And then once we know that, we unpack the standards and we analyze our learning targets. Then, in the nitty gritty, day to day, in the trenches of building our lessons, we ask ourselves these questions. Now, this flowchart makes it seem like I sit down every single day and I'm asking these questions to myself. In my 16th year of teaching, this is just second nature in terms of I'm doing this constantly on the fly as I am building my lessons and building my units. Um, because assessment has become second nature to me because as we said before, assessment drives instruction. So if I'm not considering these questions while I'm building my lessons, I'm not really properly planning my lessons. So anyway, after we've unpacked our standards and we analyzed our learning targets, we ask the question, is there knowledge or understanding that needs to be assessed? If the answer is yes, most likely, if it's knowledge and understanding and not application of that knowledge and understanding, then we could probably use selected response assessments. So over here, selected response assessments would leads us to choosing. We could do multiple choice, true, false, matching, listening, fill-in, interview protocol, because these forms of assessment allow us to know if this did the student understand what we were talking about. Now, are there some limitations here? Yes, because multiple choice is also based off of probability. If there are four answer choices, the student might guess and they might get it right based off of the guess. With that in mind, the understanding is this: if you're giving enough questions, most likely based on probability, the student is not going to be able to guess every single question correctly. So while individual questions, you may wonder, are they really giving the full response? Um, the answer to that would be is, can they guess every single answer correct? Possible, but not probable. Now, if the knowledge or understanding does not need to be assessed, and we're looking more at application of them, then the question is there high level thinking required? If it's no, we go back to our selected response assessments, because if higher level thinking is not required, then we can just use a traditional selected response assessment there. But if the answer is yes, higher level thinking is required, then we have to ask the next question, which is, would the standards best be met with a product or not? Do you need a physical product in order for the students to demonstrate mastery of that standard? If the answer is yes, we have two choices here. We can do a written response, which is most often what teachers choose, or a visual diagram. Written responses include the traditional essay. It includes student logs and journals. In lower levels of teaching at the younger grades, it could just be a paragraph, so like a short response. Students may need to maintain a notebook. At the higher levels, with the older grades, students may need to write a research paper to demonstrate their mastery of the standards. Visual diagrams include concept maps, graphs, flowcharts, as this is, matrices, webs, and Venn diagrams, which I'm going to go more in depth in the following slides. Now, typically speaking, teachers default to products because products are concrete in terms of they're easy to put into portfolios, they're easy to manipulate in terms of did the student get it or not? Well, I have a product. This product proves whether or not they have it. But oftentimes, we may not need a physical product in order for students to demonstrate their mastery. This leads us to performance-based assessments. So, for example, oral presentations, doing a demo, participating in a debate, role-playing, a panel discussion, a mock court or mock trial, producing artwork, doing projects, creating music, or doing a reenactment of, let's say, a scene from history or a scene from a book or story. So what does this mean? First off, performance-based assessments is a trend that started, I would say, in the 90s and early 2000s, and it's coming back and it's very popular now. And especially post-pandemic, performance-based assessments is making a comeback. And typically, performance-based assessments are usually linked where a written there's a written portion to it, so it kind of combines the best of both worlds. But the point here is this: students don't always need to write something in order to demonstrate their comprehension and understanding of something and the mastery of those standards. Therefore, they can perform a task in order to demonstrate their mastery. Last thing I want to cover in this particular flow chart is that orange diamond. First thing is questions. So questions are very important on a daily basis. And whenever you're writing a lesson plan, I'm highly recommending this because I didn't do it for most of the beginning of my career. I attribute that to poor mentoring and poor professional development. But you want to write down, you want to script the questions you want to ask throughout your lesson plans, because you want to make sure that your questions align to the standards, they align to your learning targets, and that the questions that you're asking as part of instructional discussion, that you're able to collect data from it based off of the discussion that you're having with your students. If you don't write them down, you're flying by the seat of your pants, and you may not cover the questions that you need to ask the students in a day-by-day scenario in order to collect that data. Observations is what we're going to be covering in 3.2. So I'm not going to really go in depth with observations right now, but observations is another thing in our toolbox in when we're developing assessment decisions. Dialogue, when we're having conversations with our students, is another form of assessment. And self assessment is vital. Students need to be able to assess themselves and assess their peers. And in doing so, it forces them to reflect on, did I meet mastery of these standards based off of what my teacher taught me, in what I need to know about these standards. If a student cannot put that together, if they can't self assess that and put that together, most likely they didn't learn what they were supposed to learn. That's why self assessment is important, and you should incorporate it all throughout a given course every given year. So, especially at the end, in terms of a summative assessment, if there is a project or a paper, oftentimes I usually have a reflection that the student writes in order to talk about. Um, uh, I want them to reflect on the rubric because I gave them the rubric as part of their learning. So, do they feel like they grade themselves? Did they meet the standards based on the rubric? Um, how would they score it if they were going to score themselves? And then they have to justify it in their reflection. Now, when I first started doing that, I'm like, but they're just going to grade themselves with hundreds. What's interesting is that as you have more and more practice in allowing students to self-reflect, you'll oftentimes find that majority of your students, you're going to have a handful of them who are giving themselves hundreds because they want a good grade. But majority of them are actually harder on themselves than you are in scoring their work. So it really allows them to really start self-reflecting and looking inward and seeing, am I learning? And it puts the onus of the learning on them and not as you as the teacher. You want them to become lifelong learners, and you want them to be able to self-reflect and be able to self-manage. Um, did I learn this or not? Because you're not always going to be there. You're not going to be their teacher forever. And because of that, they need to be their own teachers. Um, so some important methods to consider, um, concept maps. What differentiates a concept map from a concept web is, you'll notice that the lines in between the boxes are labeled because they show the relationship between the boxes. So, this is important because this helps students, and especially in terms of 21st century skills. As somebody who has been teaching since 2007, so I've been teaching since um, the beginning of the 21st century, for the last 16 years. One of the things that I've observed is that students today tend to not understand the relationships. They can't transfer relationships between concepts. They'll see concept A and they'll see concept B, but oftentimes they can't explain how A relates to B. Oftentimes they think that A exists mutually exclusive from B and not understand that there is a cause and effect relationship. Oftentimes it has to do with the fact that that discussion is more abstract than it is concrete. So a lot of students have difficulty um, concretizing, like really setting it into stone of how ideas, because ideas in and of themselves are abstract, how ideas relate to themselves. So, creating systems using concept maps concretizes it so that students are able to physically see, oh, this is how A and B are related to each other. This is how A and B leads to C. Oh, here's another idea of how, oh, I didn't even know that, you know, A over here and Z over here. Oh, there's a direct line of relationship between them. I just didn't see it beforehand. Concept maps could be used in any subject. It could be used in trying to understand the relationships of different ideas in art, in music, in science, in math, in history, in foreign language. You name it. You could use it in any different way. Now, in terms of using this as a form of assessment, um, you can use it as a form of note taking, but also you could plug it in terms of creating an incomplete concept map and asking students to fill in the missing parts so that they can show how do these ideas relate to each other. Graphs and charts. I'm gonna be honest with you. I hate numbers. Numbers are evil. I like talking with my math colleagues, and I tell them, I don't know how you're able to teach such an evil subject to students because numbers are just horrible. I like letters. Letters don't lie. Well, for the most part. But anyway, um, graphs and charts are important because students need to know how to read graphs and charts. And there's been a larger trend lately, over the last 20 or so years, of increasing the use of graphs and charts, especially at the younger grades. Um, I've learned as an English teacher, while graphs and charts seem foreign in terms of using it in literary analysis, because literary analysis really doesn't fit with graphs and charts. They're actually very useful in ELA, whether they're for numeric purposes or not. Um, I've learned, uh, especially later on in my career, that unfortunately, math has its place in ELA, and I have to just accept it, even though I don't like math all that much. I very much like ideas and concepts and the way I like to explain a research paper to my students is, it's a lab report, but instead of mixing chemicals, you're mixing ideas. And you know, that sometimes is difficult for them. But coming back here to graphs and charts, again, just like I said before with concept maps, it concretizes abstract ideas, even if you're dealing with concrete things like numbers of supplies and types of school supplies, and now you've mapped it out on this is a graph, this is a chart. It really, the visual is very important for today's students because um I'll be brutally honest with you. The rise of social media, the rise of screens, the rise of television and streaming and the internet, um, thinking is a problem for um, today's generation. Thinking is a problem because they're so used to thinking being done for them. If we have time, one of the last units I want to talk about is artificial intelligence, chat GPT, and this idea that like we've gotten to a point now where we can actually ask artificial intelligence to create ideas for us. Um, and there's pros and cons to it, like anything else. But getting back to this, you know, graphs and charts really make concrete abstract ideas, um, and it could also be used as a form of assessment. So, for example, disregard the numbers, but let's say you gave a student in elementary school a list of vocabulary and you hand them back to them their vocabulary tests for the last few weeks, and you ask them to create a line chart that shows their progress over time. And this shows them, okay, I had a vocabulary test in, oh, I hit the button. No, come back. Come back. There we go. Go back. They had a vocabulary test in September, um, and they only got 3 words correct. And the one in October, they got 5 words correct. Now November. Oh, they're bringing it up. They're bringing up the heat. They got 10 words correct. In December, it's like, oh, break was coming, so they didn't get as many words. Point here is this: they can self-assess and see, am I learning my vocabulary? Simply by mapping it out on a line chart. It's just another way for them to self-assess their mastery of the standards. Matrices are another thing that we can use. One of the matrices that a lot of us have encountered is the multiplication table. Can you can give them a blank multiplication table and ask them fill out the numbers. What's 1 times 1? What's 1 times 2, right? And can they fill out the whole chart? What it also does, again, I want to emphasize again, this helps concretize abstract ideas and organize information it organizes information into chunks that are easy to comprehend. Here's an example of something to do with technology. So accessibility. I copied this picture. I should have figured out where I was getting it from, but the whole point of this is, as you can see, it lists the accessibility, the cost, the difficulty, the delivery date, superimposed on the conditional formatting, the smart text, the app mentions, the notifications, and the keyboard shortcuts. So even though we don't have a title of what this is actually showing us, the whole point is this. We have a whole lot of information here that if we were to make the middle part blank, you could think of the other parts for science. You could put science ideas. You could put mathematical concepts. You could put English concepts, art concepts. They could be around these matrices, and the students would have to fill them in order to demonstrate their comprehension of something. Venn diagrams, the very traditional one that we're used to is the traditional 2-circle diagram. This shows the relationship between 2 ideas, 2 concepts. This one is car A and car B. Car A here is a sedan, car B is a hatchback. The outer circles are about how they're different. Their overlap is how they're similar or the same. We can have fun with Venn diagrams. So the bottom right corner is TV series complex from other point of view. And this Venn diagram has 1, 2, 3, 4 oval shaped vens, I guess we can call them. They're overlapping concepts. In this case, the overarching concepts are being set in a different time, having choral casting, based off of a book, and having badass villains. So each time they overlap, it shows how it relates to the other one. So, for example, if we look at the Vampire Diaries are based off of a book, and they have choral casting. However, they don't have a badass villain, or they're set in a different time. They're set in modern day. So, Again, this helps us concretize abstract ideas or complex ideas and allows to provide a lot of information in a small amount of space. Why is that important for the modern student? Because the modern student has all this information that they have access to. They don't know how to organize it, they don't know how to put it together, and they really don't know how to simplify everything that's out there. So this is why Venn diagrams are another way that we can assess students' understanding of the standards. Some summary and takeaways, not only of this presentation, but the chapter as a whole that you read in the textbook. Triangulation of data is important, but is it always feasible? Not always feasible, but triangulation is important because we don't want only one piece of data in order to determine whether or not students have met mastery of the standards. We want to be taking it from multiple different types of assessment points. The role of teacher in observations, I'm going to go more in depth with that in the next module. Prior construction of modules of performance evaluation. Rubrics are important because rubrics are self-regulation tools for learning. They provide scaffolding for anything that requires a rubric. So for example, in this course, I don't know if many of you noticed that you have access to rubrics for majority of the assignments that are there for you. So you know exactly the expectations of what demonstrates mastery for any specific task. Oftentimes, I've been giving feedback of like, the task asked you to do this and to provide this, you miss this. So it allows you as the teacher to have that conversation with your students. If you have your rubric in front of you, your rubric also has to be aligned to the standards and aligned to what you're assessing. We're going in a future module, we're going to learn how do we do that? How do we go from the standards and create rubrics that will help us grade the assessments that we're creating based off of the standards? Many items fall under assessment for learning, not just summative. So oftentimes we think that summative assessments are just assessment for learning. Formative assessment is important for assessment for learning, but also not simply to measure learning, but how do we use assessment as part of the process of learning? And student self-assessment is critical. It's vital in order for students to self-reflect and take charge for their learning. And as always, this is another example of how assessment drives instruction. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you very soon for 3.2, where we're going to explore more about observation. So talk to you soon.